Hi, the year has come to an end, and today we'll take a look at what happened this year. Our guest is Vlad Bootie, one of the strongest Russian-speaking players. And Bootie and Avr0ra will help us. Alexei, hello. Vlad, hello, glad to see you. Hello everyone. And I'd like to ask our guest, Vlad, how was this year for you? What are your plans for the next year? The year turned out to be excellent, especially compared to the previous ones. Most of the tasks and goals that I set, I eventually completed. And for the most part, that's not only about poker. But the poker year was also pleasant compared to previous ones. If we take the distance over the last 5 years, I've experienced a slight decline since the COVID years. Let's just say that I've slowed down a bit in my career growth. Psychological problems related to COVID and war began. This greatly affected both the volume and the quality of work. But this year I managed to pull myself together, make a plan, and stick to it. Accordingly, this resulted in the fact that I went to play quite expensive stakes, and there, in a fairly short period of time, I managed to win everything that I had lost there in recent years. As a result, I got a kind of an achievement. I recently won a pot of, I think, 120 or 125,000 in November, right at the very end of the year. Was this on mobile apps? Yes, it was there. I played there for the most of the year because on the main sites I was very careful about table selection. This also became one of the important adjustments this year, unlike earlier versions of me as a player. The fact that I started to be much more careful when choosing expensive games. On the main sites WPN and GG, I didn't play that much in the most expensive games, but I showed a good win rate. But yes, the main distance for me was on mobile apps, where the game was much more enjoyable and I managed to win a lot there. Congratulations on a successful year, glad you finally won more money. I've known Vlad for a very long time, and since the year 2012-2013 he has had an excellent understanding of the mechanics of poker. I remember how you built models in Cardrunners EV when solvers weren't even around. It's probably funny for you now to remember what we were doing then. While we were preparing for this video, I remembered one interesting thing. I think you'll find it funny to listen. We were building some kind of model in Cardrunners EV, and you had a hypothesis that position in poker does not matter at all. You wanted to use the example of the Cardrunners EV model to prove that pot will be divided equally. You probably don't remember this at all. I almost don't remember. Do you vaguely remember this hypothesis? I remember a little. I think I even described this somewhere on my blog. And there was a discussion where many then laughed at me. There were no clear answers back then. I thought it sounded fishy, but maybe it made some sense. You made a lot of models then, a lot of different branches, and this probably all sounds funny now. Now we already have ready-made solutions, and I also know from myself I've done worse things. My coach Alto were such a famous poker theorist. You didn't really interact with him because he was there before you. He forced me to solve quadratic equations to realize equity with discriminants and so on. It was complete nonsense. Based on our answers, it turned out that you can't call anything at all on 3-bet. Let's say from bottom you cannot call 10-9 suited to 3-bet, for example. We lack equity implementation. We calculated the equation with the discriminant and it turned out that we cannot make this call, not at all. So I did even more crap. So now after a while it's quite funny to remember. It was a good time. Then the winner was the one who naturally felt the game better. He had the best strategy, without the current solver calculations, exploits, locks, and so on and so forth. You just intuitively felt the game and beat your opponents due to this. I like poker a little more this way, even though I myself am a supporter of deeper technical analysis with numbers. but just as an idea, I like it better when people compete in their logical reasoning and they get some results from it. Poker has come a long way. It seems to me that you've changed a lot too. I've known you since a fairly early age. I remember that you were much more aggressive in the game and on the forum, and now you approach everything more rationally. I think poker has changed you a lot over the years. Well, I think life experience in general had an impact. I started playing quite early and appeared on the forum when I was around 17 or 18 years old. I started playing earlier. I started playing around the age of 15. The first 2 years were spent playing in free rolls and $1 tournaments. You've played so-called 50 tournaments, right? Yes, I had 50 tournaments, SNGs on 3 tables. SNGs have been around long enough for 3 tables and 2 tables. This was the first discipline in which I was able to gain a foothold and become a top winner in this discipline. Then I went further. This was all in the initial stages. And then, of course, I was much more maximalist. And I was more aggressive both in communication and in life in general. And in general, I had a much more risky lifestyle, more free. Now, with age, I seem to have become more cautious in my decisions in life, including my professional career. Let's say that life taught me. It taught me some lessons that showed me that I was not choosing the best model of behavior, let's say. We need to be a little more pragmatic, probably. You're probably right. One more thing on this topic. You and I have been playing poker for a very long time. You just started earlier if you take your age specifically. Back in 2016 I remember everything because I actively follow Gypsy Team. You created a topic on the forum called Time to Leave. You tried to move to Omaha for a very long time. It seems like it was in 2014. As I understand it, you plan to leave for Omaha every few years. And in 2016 you created a topic saying that you were planning to end your career. And now it's 2024, 8 years have been passed, you're still with us. Question arises, how did this happen? Firstly, the desire to leave poker was always due to the fact that I had unsatisfactory results. Then I assessed my prospects worse. At the moment, I did not expect that I would end up where I found myself now. I assumed that I would play somewhere around 500 NL or 1k NL and make around 50k per year. 100k a year was the ultimate dream. And I thought that if this is my best outcome and on average I will do worse, then I need to change something and quit poker. Well, given the fact that I had a protracted downswing and some periods of unstable psychological state, I showed poor results. And the bankroll was relatively small. I was thinking about doing something else. At the moment, I had already started trying to organize some events, parties, and went to DJing. There were even ideas of becoming a drug dealer or something like that, but fortunately, I was lucky not to go down this road. There were a lot of different thoughts, and then it seems that poker for me was almost a finished story. Everything has changed after I met a well-known high roller. We talked about poker for a while and decided it would make sense to try again. In addition, we discovered that we were mutually interested in working on the game together. And just from this attempt, everything worked out and went up. In part, it was just the way things turned out. The down streak is gone, the game has become a little better, the bankroll began to grow. We began to develop together and became more confident. It was a whole combination of events that helped me return to poker. Believe in myself and in my prospects of this activity. As for Omaha, I always thought that this was a more promising game. By the way, many players thought the same and still think so. Even if it's a kind of a meme that Omaha is a promising game. So I think this is not surprising. Purely intuitively, it seems that Omaha has a higher win rate. I mean, you will have a higher win rate in Omaha probably. Accordingly, there is more potential for exploitation and self-realization. Plus, it feels like there are more hobby players in Omaha. That's what I think. By the way, one of the achievements of this year, for the first time I went to the expensive offline, to Monaco, and there 3/4 of the expensive tables were 4-card Omaha and 5-card Omaha. A minority of people played Hold'em. Offline Omaha is much more profitable. I think if someone wants to play Omaha, then this should be done with an eye to offline and mobile apps, because there are quite a few 5K NL games online. GG has a high rake, but there is practically no such game on other sites. I know some of the good Omaha players, and they mainly specialize in applications and go to play offline. I think this is the right strategy. I had been planning to move to PLO for quite some time, but this lifestyle still seemed not quite suitable for me, especially in the future. And so I decided to slightly adjust my approach. I'm now gradually trying to learn MTT, in particular during your streams. Sometimes I come in to have a look. I work in software, study the game. MTT also has very long sessions, like 10 hours. This is also not the most convenient mode, but it is still possible to play online. And you can play on good sites, where you won't have to solve many different problems about making the game fair, and so on and so forth. In this sense, I will be calmer, even though the work schedule will be a little less convenient. And in general, my idea is to combine MTT and cash for the first couple of years and not switch right away. Yes, it's the same game. Yeah, the game is the same, it makes the task easier. But when I work in solvers, I find it quite difficult in different empty spots. But at least you have 2 cards in your hands, and this is already something familiar. I remember that you and one well-known high roller created your own poker school. I remember this because my friend studied there, so I know a little more about it. But could you tell our viewers how it ended in the end? Because from the outside it seems that this option for making money in poker suits you quite well. I definitely agree here. If theoretical work paid money, I would be the richest man in poker. But in general, of course, this is a good alternative, opening your own poker school. This story ended with us having worked a full season and the players' contracts had expired. Next, we planned to either expand, do some kind of full-fledged project with a large number of players, because training a group of 15 people is not very profitable in terms of earnings. This is very far behind the earnings you earn while playing at the tables. The ratio is not even 5-to-1. We thought then that we would either expand or close the project. We tried to invite new students, but did not receive enough applications. As a result, it was decided to postpone this idea until better times. We planned to train more than 50 people, then it wouldn't make sense, considering that the 2 of us were involved in this project. Accordingly, income was divided by 2. Therefore, we just needed large volumes. By the way, regarding the well-known high roller, this was not a reference to Enlight in the previous answer, although Victor and I also worked a lot on the game, especially in recent years. But then Victor and I did not know each other yet. it was 2016, and I met Victor somewhere in 2018, 2019, 2020. Oh, I think I understand what kind of notorious high roller we are talking about a very well-known high roller. Well, then Stefan remains on the list of well-known high rollers. As far as I know, you helped him with theoretical preparation for the heads-up game against Viktor Malinovsky. I would like to know more about this, because it is one of the key events of recent poker years. Well, I won't give away all the secrets, but I will tell you that we worked together. Usually this happened in a such way that we called each other, studied hands, and tried to understand Victor's logic. The goal was to get into Victor's head and understand the way he thinks, because when in a one-on-one game you understand your opponent's way of thinking, consider yourself to have already won, because you will be ready for any situation when your opponent has nothing else to oppose you. He cannot fundamentally restructure his entire game during a game. Accordingly, he begins to have problems. As a result, the one who better understands his opponent's thinking has an advantage. And I think we did very well. We did this well for the first part of the match. Then Victor began to rebuild his game, which is why we had difficulty recognizing all this quickly. Then we more or less figured it all out, and closer to the middle of the match, Stefan decided to immerse himself in this match as much as possible, and he rather worked there alone. He caught his wave, let's say. It is hard to describe, but he caught his wave, and in principle, he no longer needed to work particularly hard on his game. He got into a state of flow and felt the changes while he was playing. He just had to keep playing. He has this ability. If he gets into a state of flow, if he feels the game well, then it is very difficult to oppose him in this state. If we talk about the different talents of different players, then Stefan's distinctive feature is not some kind of technical preparation or tilt resistance, but the ability to deeply feel the game in his best state and feel it as deeply as no one else can. Based on this, he can make some super high quality decisions. I can say that you definitely managed to get into Victor's head, because in the first half of the match there was complete dominance, and then Limitless seemed to be on tilt. And then, even if he already tried to rebuild, it was no longer so effective, because with such devastating start, it is very difficult to pull yourself together and remain competitive. As far as I remember, the match could be divided into 3 parts. In the first part, there was a huge advantage on the part of Stefan. Then Victor rebuilt and even began to win along the red line, and he even started to succeed a little, but at some point there was a turning point again, and the ending also ended without a chance. The second and the third parts of the match also passed without a chance. I think there Victor already felt that he was doomed and was simply trying to finish the match. In addition, things started to go well for Stefan, which made the situation even worse. In such matches, it is very difficult to cope with the game as a whole, with the pressure from what cards are dealt to you. I think that when there is a match between a strong player and a strong player, both of whom are very aggressive players in this case, if luck is on the side of one of the players, it is very difficult for the second not to give up and in general not to lose a lot. In this sense, it seems to me that there were not many chances, especially when the initial position was such that during the match Stefan was ahead, and at the end of the match he also started to get lucky. It was quite difficult to get out of this situation somehow, so I think Victor did everything he could for the most part. Interview after the match. I studied the hands, I was very interested. It was noticeable that it was as if Stefan was getting into Victor's soul. Stefan attacked splits where necessary. He absolutely never called some sizes. On the other hand, he called other sizes very freely, as if he really reads how Victor thinks. He understands this and understands the logic perfectly. You probably worked a lot on sizing splits. But it's just the feeling of where someone's sizing is built crookedly. It's just about this feeling of the game. That is, this is his distinctive feature. In a match against him, I think the best adjustment is to play without sizing splits at all. Just because here it's more likely... Yeah, I wanted to say that it's very difficult to deceive him. That if you try to deceive him, then most likely you will simply deceive yourself and remain in the red. That is, if we talk about his model, about his approach to studying the game, then he has the whole training model. It is based on experience. This means that during the hand he tries to know these important aspects, some little things. He does not focus on how much equity his hand has and what pot odds are. He's still bad at calculating pot odds, I think. I think he directs all his attention to such details. What size does a person prefer for a value bet? What texture? In what type of texture does he have more bluffs? In what type of texture are there fewer bluffs? How does he perceive runouts? And so on. We can say that these are psychological techniques, but it would probably also be wrong to call it that. This is still a game, but this is not quite the technical part, not quite the technical mathematical part of the game, so to speak. And in this, it seems to me that he has no rival, at least when he was at his peak. Now he doesn't have much experience and little practice, a little out of trend, I think. But if we take the years 20 and 21, when everything went well for him and he played well, then naturally he could not be surpassed in this aspect. And in fact, when we practiced together, that is, very often it was precisely this side of his game that I tried to adopt for myself. In principle, quite successfully at the moment, but I did it with my own approach, with my own characteristics. As a result, he got into Victor's head precisely by the way he distributes his ranges. And then, just when the red line went to 0, at the moment when Victor rearranged his ranges, or when he rearranged his main frequencies, and it took time to feel it, because you can't feel it instantly. Even if you're the best player in the world, for a couple of thousand hands, it is very difficult. It takes more time to see these small transitions from one size to another. Well, let's move on to the events of the year. We will make a brief recap by month or approximately by time of the year when it happened. And what happened in January and February? Let's remember. In January and February, the main event for me personally is the heads-up between Make Boyfriend and Enlight. We reviewed heads-up Stefan versus Limitless. Here was another match, which was also quite interesting. In fact, they started playing quite spontaneously. It's just that Vita tried to hold all the tables, but Make Boyfriend did not want to give it to him. And so gradually started playing, first on GG. Then on GG along with ACR to pay less rake. Then again on GG. In general, they played actively in both January and February. It went unfortunately for Enlight. I was rooting for him. He lost this match quite seriously. Make Boyfriend won a decent amount in total. He won 600k, 700k according to his net profit on 10k NL and 20k NL. The main stake was 20k NL. The match was quite long, meaning they played in small sessions because Make Boyfriend generally plays in small sessions. January, February. How many hands did they play in total? Like 15k probably, right? By the way, in my opinion, it was not 600k, it was a little less, as far as I remember from communicating with Enlight. But there he won at 10k NL and lost at 20k NL. In buy-ins, Enlight lost a little, maybe 10 or 15. Well, what is it like for such strong heads-up players? 15 buy-ins per session can be lost easily. But in terms of money, it turned out that Enlight won and lost in the wrong place, let's say. Yeah, I remember. As far as I can remember the beginning of the year, even though it was a long time ago, then Make Boyfriend played not so often. That is, he didn't have much gaming practice, he took a fairly long break in Omaha and basically rested, but Enlight played a lot and was in good shape. And in terms of specialization, although Victor is not a heads-up specialist for us, but in terms of his game, especially in the first part of the match, he was superior technically and morally, one might say. But then, of course, due to the hot run, because of what was going well for him, Make Boyfriend began to catch his game and began to feel more confident. And the second part of the match, most likely they played on equal terms, or even Enlight was an underdog. To what extent this can be expressed? Relatively speaking, the first part of the match, Victor had EV of around 4 or 5 BB per 100 hands, and then they leveled off and already Make Boyfriend had an expectation of around 2 or 3 BB. That's roughly how I would rate it. Well, in fact it turned out, of course, otherwise. Heads Up is a game of variance. That is, even matches like Stefan versus Limitless, when they played 50,000 hands, the luck factor is important in them. Relatively speaking, there are plus minus 50 buy-ins you can play for a segment of 100,000 hands easily with equal skill. This is a standard deviation. It exceeds 6 max, especially when both players have more aggressive styles than the average in the field. Let's say Stefan, on average, inflates pots a little more than the soloer. Yeah, a bit bigger. Like, he goes all in about every other pot. Actually, this accelerates the variance even more, and it is very difficult to predict at short distances what will happen in this match. I have a question about this match. I wonder how you assess the EV. That is, you watched, at first you thought that Victor had an advantage, but in the end they were equal. I also actively watched the match. I was playing at the same time. Victor and I were in the same time zone. I watched it all happen. I watched the table, and if the hobby player will sit down, then I will sit down too and the table will begin. Therefore, one might say I was forced to even watch the match in the first place and noticed one interesting moment. I'm well aware of Make Boyfriend's story as a major poker gossip. He always approached the game quite concentrated. For a period of his career he only played 2 tables at Poker Stars and no more tables at all. He closed the tables with hobby players, playing only Rig War table. He had such a turning point in his career, that is, he's very meticulous and attentive to the game. Victor started the match, let's say, in Stefan's style. And this is when, you know, you are playing 8 tables with hobby players, heads up with 1 player and with another in parallel. I'm talking about Stefan's style right now. The first half of the match, maybe the first third of the match for Victor, was not only a match with Make Boyfriend, but also just his regular session. But I watched carefully. Make Boyfriend played only with Enlight. He closed all the tables, that is, he played the match with Victor. It seems that for Victor this match started later, and then he tried to test an arrogant person through his own experience in poker. Yeah. Everything was exactly like that. Due to this, it seems to me that Make Boyfriend could neutralize a certain advantage. Because Victor, after all, the standard for him is to open 6 tables, 2 reg war tables plus 2 heads up tables with just different opponents and so on. And for him it's simple, he's been playing like that for his whole career. For him, it's not really a very aggravating factor. There was a question, is it really so unimportant for a player of this level that he can actually play with 2 different opponents? I think it has an effect. That is, if they played only 1 table together, then accordingly the difference in the level at the initial stage would be probably even greater. I just think that by adding tables, Victor, for example, does not lose much. I mean, he loses much less than the average player. It is clear that he has a lot of experience, namely experience of this approach. And due to this, if I called numbers of 5BB at the first stage against Make Boyfriend at the beginning, then, for example, if 1 table was played, well, there it would not be 5BB, but maybe 8BB. 8BB is also like a good win rate, because in heads up, FPIP there is 80% each, and there are much more opportunities to realize your edge than 6 max, for example. At 6 max we have FPIP around 25 or 30, and just in principle there are much fewer situations where you can beat someone or something. Yeah, that's interesting. If we look at the win rate in different matches, then there will always be 5BB plus results. Let's say rare matches like Very Sweet versus Limitless, where they ended up with 2BB. And so most of the matches end in a loss, a noticeably greater loss for one of the players. Even taking into account the fact that this is a dispersive discipline, it is still dispersive, but at the same time the win rate is high. Accordingly, I think that without this factor, the advantage would have been even greater, around 8BB. But let's say in order to get into shape, a top player needs to play 5,000 hands, and it will already be possible to play more or less on equal terms. It depends on how lucky you are during these 5,000 hands. If it's bad, then it won't work out. If it's good, then yeah. Therefore, of course, it will also depend. But on average, as I call it, if you exclude the dispersion factor a little, then 5,000 hands will be alright. It's when you play those 5,000 hands with the best opponents with full concentration, like Make Boyfriend did. Fair. Therefore, win rate assessments are a subjective thing, but I agree with you. I think also precisely because Victor was in a good shape then. He was definitely the favorite at first, but Make Boyfriend, I think, will disagree with this assessment. He's also such a rather self-confident player. I think my boyfriend considered himself the favorite from the start. Are there people at high stakes who are not self-confident? It happens. It seems to me that David Yan evaluates himself objectively. Well, he plays MTT, but still, he's not a cash player. He will just be on our list of the best players of the year. It seems to me that Alex Treff's self-esteem should be alright. Yeah. Alex Trev is a good example. Although I have not communicated with him, his approach is more moderate in this sense. But this is rather an exception. If we look at the players who play NL 40k, NL 100k, NL 20k, I think most people think that at the table of 6 people, he will be at least in the top 3, and he is not an underdog. And everyone at the table thinks so. And we smoothly move on to March, when one of the biggest events was the boycott of regulars at GG Poker. In fact, the boycott is probably the brightest event of the year for me, because it was very unexpected. Nobody believed that it would work. We even recorded a podcast there with UBRD. We found out that the rake was raised and a new beginning was added for our podcast. And many people told me that nothing would work out, that they would never go back. GG won't listen to you at all. But somehow the regulars managed to consolidate so much that the lobby literally died out. Simply died out. There was simply no one in the VIP games. And it was really cool, it was really cool. GG started thinking and sent Elki to us to negotiate, and we actually rolled back. Everything is as it was, and even in some ways, maybe even a little better. They promised that there would be a connection, but the natural connection did not continue. Elki immediately disappeared. In general, all contact was lost, but at least we managed to consolidate this point so strictly that we were able to cancel the changes. Roughly speaking, if you were asked about the percentage probability that this is possible, it seems to me that many people would not give even 10%. Therefore, we can say here we won, and this is not an accident. It is precisely because we managed to organize ourselves very well. Still, cash players understand much better where the money comes from and how the mechanics of the game work. And with new rake, games simply practically became unbeatable, and this was unprofitable for anyone. There were a couple of people who continued to play during the boycott, but it was really just a couple of people. There are also semi-racks. Let's put it this way. That is literally about 150 players, about 100 players participated, and the lobby completely died out. But at the moment it really seemed incredible because, firstly, this had never happened before, and secondly, GG is still forming an industry now, and it's hard to imagine that they made some changes, not carefully considered, and then took them and rolled away under the influence of whatever it was. This is due to the fact that the high-stakes community is still quite small. As already mentioned, 150 people, or even a little less. Therefore, it was a little easier to consolidate them, and then the situation was such that everyone unanimously agreed that this could not continue. And I would say that 99% of players understood that if everything was left as it was, then high stakes itself would die. Therefore, everyone united quite easily, and there it is. In fact, when at the initial stage, when we were still writing basic letters, text on forums, and so on, there were doubts about the success. But then, when we saw the first reaction from GG in the forum when they sent Elki for negotiations, then it became clear that most likely this would be a successful event. And in fact, of course, when the negotiations took place, I experienced very great moral inspiration. I don't know, it's hard to compare with anything. You probably, it's when your team, the one that you support, wins some tournament, you feel something similar. Yeah, I agree. It's a pity, of course, that this didn't go further. Somehow it was not possible to set up the connection and to improve the ecosystem further, because there is still something to improve in these games. Starting from short tables, ending with rake in regular games. This system can be made even more mutually beneficial for both players and the site, but so far the management is not very interested in this. And since April, at least what we had in the podcast, it was a very expensive game in Omaha, and Linus probably lost a lot. Say something about this. These are rumors because we don't know the exact results, but it seems that Linus lost quite a lot at coin poker in very expensive Omaha. And probably thanks to this, we saw Linus at the tables all year. He played actively, held a lobby and reg ward on WPN. We saw a lot of interesting hands, a lot of action. I think that with this April loss of Linus in Omaha, we, as his opponents, should be upset because we had to play with Linus. And on the contrary, it was cool for the audience because we got a lot of hands, a lot of interesting events. It's probably worth noting that I remember a funny discussion at 2+2. Is Linus on tilt? Why does he play all in every hand? And there really was all in every time, like in every hand. Well, it's clear that this is a joke, that it works selectively, so that only big hands get on the screens, but in reality the posters on 2+2 thought that Linus was on tilt and was losing his bankroll in Omaha. Cool. My personal impression from Linus's performance is that for the last year and a half he has been playing like for fun, let's say, not very interested in winning. If you look specifically at his strategy, at some numbers and indicators, it was immediately clear that in many ways he plays without such strict motivation as he played before. It's as if he had lost any interest in poker, at least in Hold'em, and by the end of this year he began to come to his senses and play, let's say, a more result-oriented game, and not just click buttons like a hobby player. If we take his results for 2021-2022, the beginning of 2023, then everything is not so beautiful there. And perhaps because he has an endless bankroll, playing online is relatively cheap. Plus, this is Hold'em, not Omaha. His interest became less and began to slow down precisely in the quality of the game. But as already mentioned, perhaps the need to win back what he had lost in Hold'em brought him to his senses. And it became clear that the quality of his hand became higher by the end of the year. Here you can say, who am I to evaluate, but it seems to me that just for those who play comparable stakes, it should be quite clear from the outside that Linus of the year 1920 and the 21-22 version are completely different players. I mean, by how many difficulties he creates and, in principle, what results he shows. Yes, it's probably all it was. This is all very subjective and cannot be assessed accurately, but I probably agree that Linus has been playing in recent years just for respect. That is, he didn't even smell the hobby player, as they said. All he did was play different games against the best players in these disciplines. This was almost 90% reg wars. Back in the spring, cash players performed well on Triton Poker. For example, Davweiler won 3.5 million. And besides, Tom Dwan won the biggest TV pot in history. I know this doesn't really apply to online, but in general it's a pretty big event in poker. These events are not so bright for me personally. Well, he won the pot with queens against his opponent's AK bluff. It is technically that hand that is not directly super interesting, but the fact that this is the largest pot in the history of broadcasting live games is probably cool, yeah. Davweiler's prize for the second place is 3 million. This is a big event because he's quite a risky player. I think for myself, he had a big share, so this victory strengthened him a lot. However, the year online did not go very well for him. At the end of the year he lost a lot, so perhaps this victory somehow gave him an extra opportunity to play more riskily. He used it, but it didn't work out in the end. I will add that he's one of those few players who has grown very much over the past couple of years and has reached the level of the highest stakes in terms of the level of play, in how creative he has become, in how well he has begun to approach the game in general. And as far as I know, he practically doesn't play rig wars. Well, there were times when he played rig wars on 5k NL, 10k NL on PokerStars. You correctly noted their guerrilla poker school, where he works. Perhaps there he raised the level of his game. Interestingly, this is similar to your situation with Enlight. They have Barack Whispered and Dude One, and you guys had Enlight and Vlad Bootie. But you closed and they continue to work. Yes, they have a bigger project. That is, in addition to Barak and Tobias, Yuri Peleg was added. There are still several people there who play highly. It seems that Dmitry Blackhair is also there. They have an Israeli team, let's say. He played Reg Wars and PokerStars. As far as I remember, it was a little earlier, probably in 2019, 2020. And if we take the last couple of years, then he specialized more in the 6-max game. He plays with all the hobby players naturally. Even if there are hobby players who don't lose much, he sits in such lineups. But I haven't seen him in lineups where there are purely regular players and limits are, let's say, NL 10k plus. He has a good professional approach to making money, and in general he also plays technically very well. Technically he has improved a lot. What makes great players? It is very difficult to identify a pattern of their action. There are players, for example, who always deviate towards the tight side. They don't call, they don't bluff, and there are players who always lean towards the loose side. Everywhere they try to call as much as the solver and bluff as much as the solver. And there are players who choose situations. These are players who choose situations that are most difficult to play against, and as a rule, these players show the best win rates. Such players include Davy Jones, Dolphweiler, Tex here. These three players from the high stakes player pool have developed very, very strongly. These three players turned out to be the most breakthrough. I think this is largely due to the fact that they began to apply this approach. I myself, in principle, am a supporter of just such an idea to play situationally against a specific opponent, in a specific situation, in specific circumstances, and try to show a non-static game. In my opinion, this is the technical recipe for the profitist style. Yes, very interesting. Agree. This is probably what Stefan is very good at. He plays according to the situation and against the opponent. I also wanted to ask you about Dude 1. During his PokerStars days, Tobias Dolphweiler tilted quite a lot. The strength of his hands greatly influenced his play. Quite a lot. Maybe you were paying attention now, whether this has changed from him or not. During his last losses, were there any obvious mistakes? Yeah. And Light and I discussed this point several times. We somehow saw that when things were going badly for him, illogical actions began to appear. You could say this is a technical defect. He haven't improved this side of his game, probably. In principle, perhaps things were going really badly, and under the influence of a very strong downswing, he began to make such bad plays. It's hard to say here, because we don't see all the cards that are dealt to him. We don't see all the hands. And it may be that everyone else in his position began to make even more mistakes. There is no way to check. The summer was marked by famous games with EE. This is a super VIP player from Hong Kong. He played NL 40k, NL 80k. At that time we still had a podcast with Durdom 1 and we looked at these games more closely. Let's remember something from these games. From the point of view of expensive games, these are probably the most interesting. Not the most expensive, but exactly how Mr. EE played was funny. Maybe Bootie doesn't remember this, but they didn't want to play with him at first. This is a hobby player who lost several million. This is a gift. You're always waiting for this. But at first, people simply didn't want to sit down with him, because he really played harshly. We have a hand that Vlad sent to us, thanks to Vlad. We will show it on a screen in a more convenient way. It's a 1000 BB pot. Looks like EE was bluffing in vain. But you can know that money has absolutely no pressure on a person. 500 BB bluff is alright for him. It was 4-bet raise on a flop and 75% on a turn, but David Yen had a top set. But, by the way, it is worth noting 3-bet on a flop with a top set. This is also a non-trivial action that David Yen was able to decide on, having probably felt the abilities of EE. I think 3-bet on a flop is mandatory because I myself watched him and played with him. He's still an overplayer and he can have sets here. Let's say there is no point in 3-bet against a competent player. Because most likely you won't play a 1000 BB pot. Even with a low set, he will think that he's too greedy. It seems to me that David Yen played greedily correctly. Because if there are 6 combinations of sets, then you will have a 1000 BB pot. As it turned out, Mr. EE didn't believe it and made a bluff without equity. Have you watched these games? Indirectly. At that moment I was not at work. I traveled quite a lot in the summer, so I only had the opportunity to observe the hands from some reviews or 2+2. I saw some parts, plus then I tried a little more to dissect his game, thinking about that he would return someday probably, and I would still have the opportunity to sit down with him. In December he came in, lost 2 buy-ins and never showed up again. Yes, but in the summer I didn't play so expensively. I approached bankroll management a little more carefully. My year at that time was not yet very positive, so I missed it. But I still was interested, and I started to analyze his game. Yes, indeed. It is clear that he has a logical thinking and an understanding of some basics is also present. He understands approximately what situations are good and bad. His downside, though, is that he tilts. When he plays well, he most likely won't even lose much in these lineups. But he is very easy to lose balance. He can tilt very easily. When he starts to tilt, his lose rate increases greatly. This is, in fact, how it was in the hand where he had King 10, especially in deep stacks. Therefore, it is very important when playing with him to track his condition and know these small features in the form of which way he deviates, when he's on tilt, and how he plays when he is not on tilt. Then you can have a good win rate against him. And if you just play against him as against someone who likes to be aggressive from time to time, then there is a chance to even lose against him. Because in principle, though he is very aggressive, but he didn't bluff all in very often. I would say that he was bluffing all in even below the optimal frequency, but he was choosing situations, like when he had King 10, where his hand should not be there at all. And he was right outside the bluffing range in this situation. Here, he is simply bluffing the entire range that he had there. And that's all, but in 9 other cases out of 10 he simply plays without bluffing. This is roughly how his game is structured, and it's not easy to go against someone like that, especially when he just started playing. There was little information about him at all. And accordingly, it's already necessary to do something right on the spot. It's also not easy to figure it out on a small sample. At first he lost a little. As far as I remember, he had something about -10 BB per 100 hands. I had a funny situation with him. Hobby players often give away their intentions with different sizing patterns and so on. I found patterns, and I think he shows a weak pattern. Well, that's it, gotcha. Let's just play. I call his bluff and it turns out the nuts. You can say that the guy keeps that in mind. His sizings are well balanced. Usually if a hobby player bets half the pot, there is nothing. If he overbets, you can throw a white flag immediately. But this guy, he can bluff with overbets and he can make a good value bet too. He tries not to show the strength of his hand. He thinks about that. Maybe someone told him that he needed to pay attention to such things. Well, the man learned from the best. Most likely he plays offline and it was explained to him there. Maybe, yeah, perhaps he was advised to play equal bets and he probably thinks about it, because he once caught me in a so-called joker's trap. In the fall, I had the most vivid experience. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was dark, I was walking past the casino and I received a telegram message. Stefan is playing heads up at the same time with Make Boyfriend, Linoslav and Button Clicker. I didn't believe it at first, but when I came home we watched these heads up matches with a friend of mine and I'd like to hear more about it. It was a funny match, and they didn't play for long. Everyone except Button Clicker quickly gave up. It's funny that Stefan's style of play. Stefan comes, sits down at the table and just sits. Therefore, such curious situations may arise when he actually played 3 tables with the 3 best players in the world in parallel. It's funny. But for him, I think it was more of just fun experience. He was not result-oriented in this situation. It was just interesting to try. I think even Stefan understands that playing 3 tables with different opponents, with the best opponents, and hoping for a profit is somewhat optimistic. Considering that Stefan himself hasn't played for almost a year, it would be quite difficult to break in like that. But there was content and fun. I think he himself also enjoyed everything that was happening. For me, September was actually more about the arrival of a new face at the highest stakes. This is Daniil Vasiliev. His nickname on PokerStars is Daniil. He has been playing mid-stakes for a long time. Yeah, I played against him in 2017 on 1K NL. And this year has turned out well for him. As far as I remember, he first won some kind of MTT for 100,000 at the very beginning of the year. Then went to play 5K NL. There he succeeded too. And in the fall, he started playing without bum hunting and immediately started playing Reg Wars on 10K NL and 20K NL. There too, there was a blowout. The luck was on his side, and for his opponents it was a huge beating. Everything came together, and it was clear how on this wave he also began to improve his game, and how much it began to improve. His style of play changed very dramatically starting around the summer. Tell us more about this, please. I'm very interested, because in my eyes he always played quite aggressively. Well, let's just say he had certain patterns of aggression. I would not say that he was a passive player, but it was precisely the logic of aggression that he had somewhere. Starting in the summer, it changed. The logic of calling changed too. I don't know how appropriate it is, again, to release such information publicly without the consent of the player himself. Because, let's say, I will tell you now and his win rate will immediately decrease by 5 times. He has complex aggression, let's put it this way. What do I mean by complex aggression? He's not afraid to knock out strong hands, he's not afraid to call, and now he's not afraid when something terrible is represented against him. That is, he developed the patterns of these confident high rollers who can do something aggressive in pretty much any situation. Because there are players who play aggressively, but they play aggressively in standard situations. and they simply lack aggression in some narrow individual spots, let's say. And there are players, as a rule, these are players who can show aggression in any spot at all. Aggression can occur in any form. This is what separates average players from the best. And this is what began to appear in Daniil's game starting in the summer, according to my observation. I don't know what caused this. His red line also went much better. As can be seen on the graph, opponents did not expect such changes and his win rate increased quite significantly. Maybe money has stopped putting pressure on him. Could this be related? By the way, I may not entirely agree with you here. I remember a bright hand with him from 2018. I already told you about it. He went to knock out my top full house representing quads. Since 2018 he knew how to do this. He was not afraid to show aggression to a nuts heavy range. I remember I raised on a river representing a full house and he shoved at me representing quads. Very few people had such hands like this. Yes, I haven't played with him much and haven't analyzed his hands much before. Perhaps it was so. The fact that he began to play more freely is for sure. No, he has a lot of hands like that, precisely in terms of the level of aggression, and he is more aggressive than the average high-stakes player, I'd say. There are many lines in which he plays more aggressively than the field, and by the field I mean 10k NL and above. I can note that I remember Daniil for the fact that he plays a lot and wins, and then somehow he loses a huge pot to Linus of 100k plus, and so, in my opinion, this went on for 4 months in a row. In fact, his result is now about 0. He's at high stakes, but at the same time with huge swings there for plus minus 500k, and his all-time win rate is positive, but he just always ends up losing a huge pot to Linus, and it's kind of funny. At the beginning of the year he played 500 NL, then everything went well, and now you can imagine that he is losing a 100k pot there every month. In a way, this is also some kind of a poker dream. Yes, it's a beautiful story, even though the end result was not quite what could have been expected. The very fact that there has been such an increase in both the money played and the level of the game is very encouraging. This is a very rare story for the present time, and it's quite pleasant. I recently studied his statistics after he received a real name on GG. He won approximately 0 on this entire distance. At first he did very well and won 500k somewhere. Then, after all, he was outplayed on 40k NL and he lost a lot of money in heads up versus Linus. His win rate is quite good, about 3 big blinds. This is a lot on GG because of their rake structure, but not much money has been won yet. Let's see how the next year will develop for him, but potentially he's a contender to be in the top 30 next year, I would say. Easily. Perhaps this experience that he gained in these games is more valuable than money over a short period of time. The end of the year was marked, in addition to Reg Wars, by games with Colorful on 100k NL, and perhaps there were some other interesting events. Yes, another player from Russia, Gia Yakubishvili, began to play much more actively. Previously he was more famous in the MTT environment, offline, but now he started trying to play expensive cash games, and in principle he has a very good start. His results in buy-ins are quite good. The only thing that it didn't work out for the most expensive games like 40k NL and 100k NL, and as far as I understand, he still positions himself as a hobby player, and for a hobby player his results are very good. That is, he loses no more than 5 big blinds there. As for his level of play, I watched his hands a little. I would compare the understanding and creativity to early Stefan at 200 or 400 NL level. He may not understand mathematics very well, but he feels where the spot is scary, where the spot is not scary, and where he can call and where it's not worth it. That is, he can distinguish suspicious sizing and understand where he can play a call and where he should not. He has this feeling, either experience or initiate. His weak part is essentially mathematics, and if he improves on it, he can actually fit into the ranks of high-stakes regulars. Yes, I agree, all this can be seen on his streams, we'll leave a link below. I can also add that he is still a very wealthy man. Sometimes he is not interested, and sometimes he does not play very carefully. So, sometimes he's being distracted by some other things, sometimes he tilts. His technical level though is very high, he actively uses the randomizer, and I feel like he feels the spots very well. And even if he thinks that he cannot call in some situation, he can occasionally call according to the randomizer. This can be called a call based on respect for the opponent. The fact that any money played online is an insignificant amount for him, of course affects the fact that he may not play completely focused. Using the example of Linus mentioned earlier, this can be clearly seen when a person has maximum knowledge and understanding of the game overall, but his motivation is not at the top, let's say. And these things immediately make themselves known. That is, all this is reflected in the results. Therefore, from this point of view, it will be difficult for him to show the level of high-stakes regular. Even if he is technically improved, still he can get to this point playing in such a not very motivated or sometimes just not focused game. But he can still show good results, even in this state. Still, your motivation in the game is of great importance. This would reflect how well we are able to reason. To find the reason to play. After all, we as biological beings are very tied to motivation. And when you don't have motivation, your quality of decisions will be lower. And no matter how much you try to talk through your decisions, if you don't have a clear understanding of why you need it, the quality of the decisions will be lower. You argue about the same things, the same thoughts, etc., but the conclusions as a result become less quality. No matter how much you want it, if you don't have a motivation. Psychological balance and physical condition greatly affect the quality of your decisions. The end of the year was marked by intense battles among the regulars at high stakes. The top 5 positions were distributed very closely in terms of profit. Quite a lot of people won a lot of money, and therefore it was especially interesting at the end of the year to see how the final balance of power would look like at high stakes. This was largely influenced by the fact that 20k NL tables appeared on WPN, on which there are a lot of reg wars judging by the number of hands, despite the fact that there are practically no hobby players on WPN. There are one hobby player sometimes create action, on WPN, but in terms of the number of hands played, players on WPN play no less than on GG, where reg wars never exist. On GG they play only with hobby players, which is quite remarkable, also within the framework of this discussion. Because if we are talking about how to improve the ecosystem, here it is clearly shown how much reg wars can be played and how much desire the players have. With the right approach, the number of hands that were played there, if you look there, some players have played 50,000 hands of high-stakes reg wars on WPN in a year. If rake is made more convenient on GG, this number will increase even more. Because it's one thing for a hobby player to almost suddenly not show up, and it's completely different when there is a possibility that a hobby player will come, and then the motivation to sit down at regular tables will be much greater, and the amount of game overall will increase. The pool of players who play reg wars will certainly expand, and the games will become much bigger. I think it could increase by 30 to 50%, I'm sure of that. This is a note to GG managers. Now I think we can move to the best players of this year. We collected information and combined known player nicknames. That is, we combined America's Card Room, GG, and PokerStars. Accordingly, here we show the top 10. These are combined for all three rooms, and this time we will start from the end. We were wisely advised that it's better to start our review of the top best players from the end to make it more interesting. In 10th place for the year we have David Yen, a professional tournament player, professional businessman, Triton winner, GG Millions winner. The man in 2023 has won everything he could. Having played only 30,000 hands, he earned 800,000, largely thanks to Mr. EEE. We were just showing a hand where he won a 1000 BB pot. People often ask me which tournament player is a good cash game player, and I think this is David Yen. He played quite complex lineups. These games with EEE are not a gift. He is a man who understands what lineups he beats and what he needs to do. You won't see any extra bad hands from him. That is, everything will always be accurate. I would say that this is a well-deserved achievement. This is a well-deserved 10th place, because he did nothing wrong. Many were afraid to play with EEE, and he was not afraid. He played right away, played big money, and showed a colossal win rate and 800,000 in net profit. That's a great result, really. I remember him from the cash days, that is, he was not an MTT player right away. He played cash on PokerStars for a long time, actively, limits 500 NL, 1k NL. He had the nickname Miss Oracle in the period of 2018-2019. He apparently already went to MTT and started playing there, and this year, as far as I understand, he is already among the top winners of GG Millions. He is in second or third place on the leaderboard. He won about 1 million or probably even more. Yeah, he won more than just 1 million. He has 2 million net profit in GG Millions. This is not the total winnings, but the net profit minus the buy-ins. It turns out that winning in cash games is a small increase in his pension. He won several more Tritons and probably other entity tournaments. Yes, it was a beautiful year for him. It is quite possible that the guy won about 5 million in this year. In 9th place we have an American player, C. Lama. His name is Kara Sullivan. This is an American flying regular player. He is well known in the American community. He actively played reg wars. Someone backed him to reg wars at high stakes. They believed in his strength and he showed an excellent result. He showed 13 BB in reg wars. I remember him, he appeared at the beginning of the year and played 2k NL, 3k NL, and then he didn't even play much at 5k NL. I noticed that he played incredibly aggressively, fighting for every pot. We played the SB versus BB line with him. On the flop I played check raise, then bet turn, and then all in on the river. He called me with king high and won. To call against me in such a line with king high and win, it takes a lot of effort. He was not afraid and won. And then I thought, what bet did I do to this player? I mean, why did I get this call with king high? But then I calmed down and understood everything. He just plays like that all the time. The guy had 55 WWSF. He very rarely gives up and has a lot of overbets. In general, this is a very interesting, active game. Maybe technically he is a little weaker than many high-stakes players, although this is not a fact at all, because his play is so variable, anything could happen in those 54,000 hands. There is a funny story, let me tell it right away, and then you, Vlad, will tell your opinion about it. Ernest Hemingway was once asked to tell his saddest three-word story, the shortest story that will touch anyone. And I had the same story, it's funny. We have a chat that consists of players who advocate fair play. There we can find out who is who, discuss suspicious players, and so on. C-Lama was suspected of something, my friend Munoz Star suspected him and was not sure of his honesty. He texted that C-Lama was playing suspiciously, but other players wrote to him that C-Lama was not a rule-breaking player. After a couple of sessions, Munoz texted in this chat, not suspect anymore. Quite a derogatory phrase. Sergey never speaks rudely about anyone, and if I were a C-Lama, I would be sad, because with the phrase not suspect anymore, I would think that it turns out that I did some kind of crap and I was written off as a suspect. You mentioned the call from him with king high. I recently saw a hand from him where he played the call with queen high or even jack high. Now I'll try to find this hand. And Light sent me a hand where C-Lama called him with queen high, and against me he made a call with king high, in a situation where it was completely unexpected. I was very surprised. They are like two brothers, he and Cindy, who are not afraid of anything at all. Cindy is probably lower on the list, but was not included in the top 10. He is probably on 11th or 12th. In terms of game, they are very similar. They call everything and everywhere, bluff into all scary situations, and they both have 50 plus WWSF and have a double-digit EVBB win rate for a sample of 50k hands for this year. They both play reg wars on 10k NL and 20k NL. They can be said to be two phenomena on WPN. Some people were suspicious. How can you show such a win rate with such a style of play? How can you even win at such a distance? Let's see what they show next year, because they really intrigued us all. There are not many players of such styles who are known to the community. The first one is Stefan, and I don't know who else there is at lower stakes. There will now be another guy a little higher on our list, who is also a representative of this style of thinking. In fact, of those who are now playing hyper-aggressively and uncompromisingly, these are two Americans, Stefan in his best years, and the player who will be further on our list. And that's basically it. I can't remember anyone else with such a wild style of play. In 8th place is Markus Ladev. I know him well from games in Cyprus. He's an Estonian player. As far as I know, he sells shares at the most expensive high-stakes games, and he performed successfully at it. He even plays 100k NL. He played 50k hands and showed a good win rate. Almost never played on WPN. The entire distance is GG, where almost 1 million of net profit. You probably had this player in mind. Marcus plays aggressively. He is not afraid to put money into the pot, somewhere even on the verge of overplay. He's a very professional player, selects cash, selects tournaments. I have never seen him at bad tables. Tournaments went well for him this year. He was in the EPT finals in the main event, if I remember correctly, in Monaco. In cash, he ended the year well at 40k NL, at 100k NL. This is the player who has the largest average pot size online, probably. Because in terms of aggression and frequencies, he is probably the most unyielding opponent online. You can never bluff him out of the pot. He doesn't care who or where, he can play cold anyway. He's not afraid to bluff wherever possible. At different stack depth, against different opponents, he's not afraid to go all in and to increase the pot size, and in this sense he's even superior to Stefan in his best years. A very bright player in this sense, who is always interesting to play against. This is very unusual to hear, because from the outside it seemed to me that Markus Ladiv was more of a neat player, but I haven't seen very many hands. You really underestimated him. I'm waiting for him to finally go and play the Triton. I personally talked to him, he wants to go, but he has a problem with his Estonian passport, because taxes are terrible in Estonia. If there are some kind of public winnings, they will rip your skin off, but I hope he will solve this problem. I think it's not difficult for Europeans to go to Austria, get a residence permit, and become a tax resident of another country. I hope he solves this problem and we see him on Triton, because I would like to see the faces of his opponents when he bluffs expensively or make an expensive call in some expensive tournament. We can see all this. I wish him success. Markus is a good guy, he's young. I think he will play for a long time. He's probably like 28 now. He only recently started playing. No, you are wrong. I played with Bootie and Avr0ra 10 years ago. I played with him back at 200 NL. He has been playing for quite a long time. Perhaps he started later than me, but in total he has already spent 10 plus years in poker. As far as I know, he only started playing professionally during COVID. Maybe he has become a high-stakes player recently, but I crossed paths with him at 200 NL. At 1000 NL I definitely played with him a lot. I played with him at 1k NL, but I think it was 2019. Maybe I'm confusing, but from my memory he has been at the tables for a long time. I played with him at 888 poker in the golden years of poker. We played with him on Poker Stars. He played a little lower, maybe mostly on 1k NL. He didn't particularly appear on 5k NL. Maybe I'm confusing, but he's been playing for a long time. He started playing offline in tournaments recently, but he has been playing cash for a long time. Plus he played Zoom 500. Several players from Estonia were playing at the same time. Among the Estonians there was also Mumipozis. He recently became very rich, won something big. There was another Estonian, I don't remember his nickname, he hardly ever plays anymore either. Mumipozis was in Hong Kong playing closed games, Macau, Hong Kong. He played in closed games both here and there. He won many millions there and simply stopped playing and moved back to Estonia. They told me that he locked himself in Macau for a couple of years, didn't go anywhere, grinded these games and made a fortune from there. There was another Estonian, unfortunately, I don't remember his nickname. I don't remember either, I only remember Bootie and Avr0ra. This is Markus Ladiv. Bootie and Avr0ra, I remember him from 2018, 2019, maybe he was taking a break. An acquaintance told me a story how he accidentally settled with Tasted Janter on the same staircase landing, and during COVID he learned to play. They probably practiced together and he started playing professionally. Mako Avr0ra was before Taisto. Taisto even appeared later. Helmets, I remember him back when he was a losing player. He played 500 NL, 1K NL, and he was losing in the year 2016-2017. I remember him for a long time. Mako Avr0ra was around then. Maybe I got everything mixed up. Interesting story. Maybe someone knows and will text us about this in the comment section. I remember one hand. I have a good memory for hands, and I remember hand with Mako Avr0ra. These are still old days because by today's standards he did nothing wrong in that hand. He raised from UTG, I 3-betted from the BB, big blind from UTG spot, and on the board it was 10-6-3. He raised against my C-bet with a pair of jacks and went all in on the turn. By today's standards that's pretty aggressive, but it's okay. And at that time it was an out of the ordinary hand in 2016. At that time I was sitting with pocket kings and thinking about what a difficult decision it was. I almost threw pocket kings away. I called, he showed me JJ and I was very surprised. There was another J on the river. I lost this hand and therefore I remembered it. He played very aggressively, which at that time was far beyond range. So it was a bad play. BB versus UTG in 2016-2017, 3-bet was on average 5%. This was considered aggressive. Or maybe even 3 or 4%. People weren't 3-betting with AK on BB versus UTG. That was the game then. Therefore, playing such a race with pair of jacks and also all in on a turn was very optimistic. You could check the turn. Moreover, he ran over me, I still remember this hand. Logically, this hand happened quite a long time ago, which is why I was surprised and remembered. Yes, I agree, maybe he wasn't playing quite professionally back then. Well, anything is possible. 7th place, we promised you Alex Trav. All the time he was close to the top and this year he reached 7th place. He could have been higher if things had gone better for him. He played actively on both GG and WPM. He plays actively with a good table selection and for many hours, excellent win rate, 7BB, earned well on both sides. Therefore, Alex Trav deserves 7th place. He probably can be characterized by a cautious style without a hard ego. That is the case when he can consider himself a little weaker than other regulars, technically, but he understands well how poker works, who wins money, and when it's worth playing and when not. Therefore, if we take dollar per hour into account, Alex Trav has higher dollar per hour than many other professionals. For me, he is the standard of professionalism. That is something to strive for. He only plays with hobby players, but the number of hands is greater than many who play reg wars. If you look at how much he played in a year, it will be clear that few people got more work done. He plays only with hobby players due to the fact that he selects the game well and spends many hours in the lobby. It is as if he is almost always in the lobby. He has many hands and a high win rate too. His dollar per hour is high, despite the fact that technically there are a huge number of players who play better, but he has had consistently good results for many years. This is not an accident. In Hold'em and in poker in general, even if your strategy is not that good, if you feel good at it and you understand your weaknesses and strengths, you understand where the money is made, you try to minimize your weaknesses too, and you absolutely can get extra EV. You can also act on your own image. This increases your EV too. The man has been playing for 13 years and knows his style well. You may underestimate him, but all his stable results for many years in a row are not an accident. This is absolutely not an accident. He knows how to play and he knows his style well. Perhaps those mistakes that seem very serious to you are simply low frequency ones. He has a pretty smart game. He plays well against hobby players too. He has a solid game. Now I'll tell you why I draw conclusions about his technical skills. We see that his win rate is 3 to 4 BB per 100 hands over the last 5 years, although he plays a lot with hobby players. Against hobby players, this is not the ceiling, because the tops have an average win rate in games with hobby players of probably 6 BB. Due to the fact that they don't play often against hobby players, the overall win rate at high stakes is low. If we take all the results from 2019-2020, then the best players will show probably around 4 BB per 100 hands, and most of them are on the list here today. There are already a large number of hands there, 500,000 hands. 4 BB is the best you can count on. Most have around 2 BB. And these are considered average high stakes players. In this sense, Alex Treff has 3 to 4 BB, but only because of playing with hobby players. But he plays a comparable number of hands, simply by playing for more hours. Therefore, if he had, let's say, 6 BB with hobby players, then I would say that he is on the same level with the best players. But here, nevertheless, after I studied his game and logic, it became clear to me that some subtle situations where you need to bluff to make your opponent believe that you have a very rare combination, they are just less developed than those of high-stakes tops. He's been playing for over 15 years. Maybe he doesn't need it. He has a professional approach. Yes, this is not necessary to be able to win 1 million. It is enough to have other qualities. Everyone has different talents. He has the talent to just be on the lobby and produce stable play over long periods. He has no tilt at all. His game does not change depending on how lucky he is at the current moment. In 6th place we have Helmets. He's a great player and he spent many hours in the lobby. He doesn't rate WPN probably, he mostly played on GG. He is one of the top winners of GG. And in the end of the year, strange plays began to happen. Probably his game changed a bit because of his upswing. We will show you a few hands where he goes well beyond the range. And he's not afraid to play hard sometimes. He plays a lot against both hobby players and he plays a lot of reg wars. I also remember a hand where he won a pot at 100 KNL against Linus. BRD probably remembers that too. We can show it to you as well. I also made a post about him in my Telegram channel. I admired his ability to select tables and his creative play. It's worth giving him credit. He's one of the best high-stakes grinders. He plays almost all lineups, and at the same time, he plays and wins. Despite his win rate only 2 BB per 100 hands, the main part of the distance is at 5k NL and 10k NL, where the rake is very high. Showing such a result in any lineups is a good achievement. He won most of the money at 20k NL, where he has a good win rate and showed a good distance. Everything turned out well for him. He has been playing high stakes for quite a long time, but this is the first year that things have worked out well for him. He had worse results before. I can tell you a story. There was a year when he won a lot on GG and he was banned. Then there was a global amnesty and he returned. So this is not the first year when he wins a lot. That is, it was such a good year that he was banned for bomb hunt. The official reason was bomb hunting. But then everyone was banned on GG. There was a global amnesty in 2018 or during COVID, and he was unbanned as well. It should be noted that he is good at sensing situations where he can call. I remember him for his ability to catch expensive bluffs. He chooses situations well to catch the bluff. He calls where, according to my gaming experience, he should not call at all. You will see a bluff at best 1 time out of 10. But he plays a call and looks at this bluff. And you think, well, he probably knows how to choose situations well. I would say that he is good at choosing situations where you can make a hero fold, let's say. And based on the residual principle, he understands situations where you can play call. So I would say that most of his win rate comes from the moments where he is good at avoiding getting into dangerous situations. This is, if you study his statistics, in terms of frequencies, he is rather a cautious player. But he does it situationally. And as I said earlier, this is not just a bias towards calling or folding, but precise decisions where you need to fold or call. He has this skill well developed. His technical game is great. He can be compared to the best high-stakes players. It's not some kind of phenomenal, but it's on the level. He knows how to choose sizings. He knows how to bluff. He is a technically strong player. This is a player for whom it is difficult to identify any special tendencies. He is a player who knows how to pick situations, hence the strange plays in many hands. When you don't understand what he's doing at all, sometimes he overplays and sometimes he gets weird plays. And for people who play standard strategy, let's say, they won't end up in this situation unless they are on severe tilt. And people like Stefan will often find themselves in similar situations. Fifth place is Davy Jones. According to analytics, he was probably considered technically the strongest player in 2022. And now, in 2023, is he the best player so far? This is a question for Bootie. I will note that the year at GG was not very successful for Davy. At some point he almost became profitable, but unfortunately he lost again. That is, GG is literally a cursed room for him, let's say, but on WPN he destroys everyone. Excellent results in Reg Wars, he even started playing Heads Up. He also is actively playing on PokerStars, one of the last players who have not yet left PokerStars and continue to play there. In my opinion, Davy Jones still has a very good sense of situations and spots. I tried to learn this by studying his hands. For example, situations when value needs to be played quickly. That is, he feels these situations very well. And by the way, these are not always obvious situations. This does not mean that you need to completely abandon slow plays like a fool. You need to choose the right situations. Let's say in situations where we are always doomed when we get called by our opponent, but due to the large amount of dead money in the pot, when we don't get enough bluffs on the river, then we can just burn his bluff equity. In these situations, the value needs to be played quickly, and he senses these situations very well. This is something worth learning from him. Technically, he is very good. A lot of creative plays. Moreover, he is not even creative in the sense that he is trying to bluff by representing very rare combinations. He has a very well developed other skill. Usually players use sizing splits. They have a main line of play and an additional line, which is rarely used. And as a rule, this subordinate line is rarely played and people play it quite poorly. These situations happen rarely, so people don't have enough practice with them. But in Davis' case, these secondary lines are very well developed. He feels his ranges just right, adds just the right amount of strong hands. He can play a merge or make the opponent think that he has a merge when he is bluffing. Of all the high-stakes players, he has these skills most clearly expressed. It can be seen that he can make good use of the secondary lines, and as you said, he plays his value well. I played with him quite a lot and got the opportunity to evaluate it in real game. He has his weak points, but who doesn't? All high-stakes players have their weaknesses, and I won't talk more specifically about his weaknesses. That would be incorrect. But I'll just say that he has some logical inconsistencies with his bluffs. I will limit myself to this. Overall, he is an incredibly strong player in terms of the technical level of his game. If we take a period of several years, I would put him in the top 3 or top 4. If we take into account the technical level of the game, the stability and some general moral qualities, let's say, the will to win and pretty much everything else that makes a good player. And considering this, I would put him in the top 4. I would also note that his game does not break down when his luck stops. At such moments his game suffers like everyone else's, but not as much. I remember one of his periods on GG, when he was unlucky. He lost a lot, but he continued to play well, began to work more on his game and reduced the volume of play. That is, the volume of the game has decreased but the quality remains. He had no major mistakes. Here, Tobias Duthweiler, whom we noted earlier, did not make it into the top 10 at the end of the year, but his game breaks down when he's unlucky. His results don't look terrible. We'll show you his graph. He was winning a lot until the middle of the year, but the end of the year was so bad that he lost everything. So his game breaks down when he's unlucky. David Jones doesn't have this, his game is stable. An interesting point about David Jones, which remains a mystery to me, not only about him, but also about a certain group of players who play in different poker rooms. His red line on PokerStars and WPN goes straight up, and on GG it goes straight down. Nacho has exactly the same situation. This is his friend, they are working on the game together. Similarly, on PokerStars and WPN the red line is positive, and on GG it is negative. And I'm trying to understand why. There is another guy, Matt Marinelli, he plays on WPN. The situation is similar there too. No matter how much I rack my brain trying to explain what causes this, I still can't understand. I have an explanation. You need to look at the percentage of games with hobby players. At tables with hobby players, you create much more multi-way pots. And in multi-way pots, the red line drops significantly. Davy Jones and Nacho have a huge percentage of reg wars. They are in the top in percentage reg wars. And when you play reg wars, you basically have heads-up pots, where it's easy to win on red line. It's easy to keep it around the 0 mark. You need to look at the percentage of reg wars. If the percentage of reg wars is equal, then this is very suspicious. But most likely it's gonna be higher on PokerStars and WPN, because people don't play reg wars on GG. And it just has an incredible impact on the red line. I can tell you this from myself. I had similar problem when I was fighting for the leaderboard at 1k NL. I did not understand why my red line began to go positive, because I didn't change anything in my game. I had a period in the game where the red line was -4 or 5 EVBB, depending on the win rate. But when I did the NL1K challenge on PokerStars, I noticed that over a few years my red line began to go much better. By that time, my statistics included about 1,000,000 hands. The red line began to stay near 0. At the same time, it seemed to me that my game had hardly changed. In some ways, I even started to play worse, because I started playing more. I started paying less attention to my hands, and my concentration decreased. This all happened due to the high percentage of reg wars, simply due to the fact that I closed not very profitable tables with hobby players, sat on an empty slot in reg war, in hope that in the end I would get a more profitable table. The percentage of reg wars has increased, and in reg wars the red line is much easier to hold. There may be a connection here. Check the percentage of reg wars. Yes, this immediately occurred to me because I myself had such questions. Years ago it was considered uncool if your red line was falling down. It needs to at least stay close to 0. This happened because of reg wars. They help you fix your red line situation. Fourth place, and perhaps the second best player in the world based on all years combined, is Linoslav. This year he played below his EV, about 500,000 below EV. But he won't get poor, you don't have to worry about him. Showed a good distance by his standards. The heaviest lineups. It seems to me that the percentage of games with hobby players for Linus is catastrophically low. Perhaps he has the lowest percentage of such lineups of all the players presented in our top. Of all the players presented here, probably C Lama can only compare. I think they both have about 15% of their games with hobby players. Everything else is pure reg wars. And in my opinion, Linus was good this year. He started playing more actively at the end of the year, and I really liked his game. He finally stopped playing Omaha, because I remember the moment when he was playing on tilt. That is, I actually saw how Linus plays on tilt. I saw him play Hold'em and Omaha at the same time. He had no luck and made mistakes in Hold'em. This year, this was not the case. He played well and a lot. 85,000 hands probably sounds funny to professional players, but believe me, this is a good result for high stakes. Linus doesn't play 5k NL, he plays 20k NL plus, he rarely even plays 10k NL. That is, in fact, all these was played at 20k NL and above. No one has played so much at such high stakes, except perhaps Limitless. I'm a big fan of Linus. In my opinion, this is the Magnus Carlsen of poker, and I really love Magnus Carlsen. In my opinion, Linus has been a little deflated lately. I would highlight other heroes. But based on the totality of recent poker years, if we take the totality of years since 2016, when he just rose to the top, then during this time there are not many players who can compare with him in terms of winnings, level of play, amount of play, and so on. But if we consider the period after COVID, then other players have already arrived. The level of the game has increased. The advantage that Linus had in 2016 to 2018 has disappeared. In my subjective perception of poker, I see how some players have surpassed him in various aspects. And even some players play better overall than him, I think. But Yeah, I mean, he's still cool. There is no denying that. I just wouldn't put him in the top 4 currently, which I outlined in my head. I'll list these players later. It would be very interesting to listen. Most of these players that I consider to be the best are already at the top. We will discuss each of them sooner or later. There are only 2 people missing here. I don't agree with you here, it's very subjective. I still think Linus is still very good. At the beginning of the year I would have agreed with you, but now he's in great shape. There was such a short segment for me when Gia Yakubishvili played super expensive high stakes. He established a rule: the one who folded shows the cards. And there were definitely some very beautiful hands performed by Linus, where I realized that he was in very good shape still. Yes, I saw this hand in one of your videos. He made a beautiful fold, and it seems it was against Barak. Well, maybe I'm not very objective, because I really like him as a person, but I still think that Linus should be in the top 5, but this is all very subjective. There is a factor of luck. Someone will have a better year or 2 and there will be a perception that this person is a genius. It's difficult to say anything specific here. How many people, so many opinions, and I think we need to move on. Yes, in 3rd place is Muna's star. This is my good friend Sergey. His year was difficult. At the end of last year he lost a lot on GG and stopped playing there altogether. And after that he played only on WPN for 10 or 11 months. In fact, he only played in one room, adding in just a little bit of iPoker and PokerStars. But really most of his entire year was spent on the WPN, where he was just destroying everyone. There are very few hobby players, many bots, dishonest players, you name it. You are constantly playing with some questionable players, let's say. And Sergey showed 10 BB and outplayed everyone. To be honest, I'm not surprised by this result. I always considered him a very strong player. Even when in 2018 we were talking about who was the best player, Linus or someone else, I always said that the best player was Sergey. He's very good at 100 BB deep hold'em. This year he was focused on WPN. Not all of these hands were played at high stakes. Some were played at 1k NL, but he also performed great at high stakes. Moreover, all these was practically won in reg wars, or at least in semi-reg wars. In any case, he won all this money in difficult lineups, as difficult as possible, against many people who are still suspected of using prohibited software. Munas played with them all and beat them. Therefore, I am very happy with his result. 1.5 million is a great profit for the year, and the biggest win rate. In terms of the ratio of big blinds won, he is ahead of his closest pursuer by almost 2 times, exactly 1.5 times. As far as I understand, this year was his best? No. 2020 and 2021 were not the most successful years for him. Then the famous heads-up of Munas against Viktor Malinovsky took place, where everything went wrong for Munas. Then there was 2022, where he lost a lot on GG. Yes, heads-up is not Sergey's strong point, but everything may change in the future. He is one of those players who has shown super stable results over many years and is among the leaders in win rate in recent years. I looked at the statistics for the last 5 years. He has a stable win rate of about 4 BB. And this is if we not take into account low stakes. This is precisely high stakes, 5k NL plus, very stable results, despite the fact that he plays a lot of reg wars. There are very few such players. He has a huge percentage of reg wars. There are very few such players with such win rates. This is Jason Gale, who did not make it to the leaderboard today. His win rate for all time at high stakes is around 4 BB. You can also note Muniz, Linus and Davy Jones. These are 4 players who show the highest win rates. But if we talk about the technical side, I would make a slightly different top. But in fact, all of these 4 people are the people who have won the most online in cash games over the last 5 years. Sorry to interrupt, I would venture to guess that if you take the entire history of hands from 2016 in Reg Wars, it turns out that Muniz will have the highest win rate in Reg Wars. If you don't take heads up into account, if we consider 3 to 4 max games, 5 max sometimes includes hobby players. But as for win rates in 3 to 4 max, I can make a guess that he will be the best in terms of win rate. I think he will be higher than Stefan and higher than everyone else, precisely by pure win rate. Stefan was never known for his win rate, but rather for his high volumes of play and for heads-up matches. I think Davy would be in this top. First place goes to either Davy or Muniz Star, I could easily believe it. As far as I understand, Muniz has a very good approach to choosing a game in Reg Wars he's preparing for his opponents too. Yes, he prepares and plays very carefully. You just have to look at the stats without heads up, because his biggest losses on both PokerStats and GG came from heads ups. But his win rates in 3 max plus are always huge, throughout history, simply huge. This is if Muniz had simply never played heads up at all, he would be richer now. In general, there were quite a lot of games, you didn't take part in them, so you may not know. It was at Party Poker at 10KNL. We played with Rob Young and we played a lot of hands. Muniz won a lot then. Perhaps you don't take these games into account, but if you find statistics from Party Poker from those years, it's probably theoretically possible to do this. Party Poker 10KNL, Muniz won several millions there. He won a lot of buy-ins, over 200 buy-ins. It's cool, it's cool. What year was this? This was in 2018 or so. There was a short period of heyday for Party Poker, when Rob Young bought it and actively played there. The most expensive tournament online was held there with a 100k buy-in. It was a short but bright period at Party Poker. Then in a year or a year and a half, we played quite a lot of hands on 10KNL, and Muniz was the top 1 winner in those games. Smart Hand just doesn't collect hands from Party Poker, but I think that these hands can be found somewhere, and they can be sold somewhere on other services. People definitely bought these in hand history. In general, you can search for these results if anyone is interested. As far as I remember, there were 2 main winners in those games. Jacer showed excellent results and won a lot from the hobby player, and perhaps there were some other European players there. To be honest, I don't remember who exactly, but some of the European players definitely played there. Those are long gone days, but for me 2018 was like yesterday. There was a time when Rob Young was playing 4 tables almost every day. There were other hobby players there. One of them was Sunner Git, a very good VIP player. In a way, he was a player similar to Zachas, who plays on GG nowadays. He played quite a lot. Moreover, he played from 1KNL to 40KNL. At the Party Poker, they were playing 40KNL. Thus, there was a short heyday of the game at Party Poker, and it turned out well for Muniz. Who knows, maybe 2023 was really his best year. In any case, this is a great result. 127 buy-ins were won by Muniz. No one has won so much except him. If we put together the first and second places in our top, their total result will be less. Still, buy-ins are, in a sense, even more important when it comes to the level of play. Yes, if we talk about the technical side of the game, buy-ins are of course more important. In second place is the top winner of all time on GG, Barak Wisbrod, owner or co-owner of Guerrilla Poker. This is a poker school. In terms of EV, he's generally in first place. It's worth paying attention to this. In terms of EV, he got almost 2 million, and excellent amount of work done and excellent result. He played Reg Wars, he played heads up, played high stakes. He won literally everything and at all stakes. That is, this is a person who is not just a strong player, but also a strong player who is lucky. This is a doubly scary thing. In my opinion, technically Avr0ra has also improved a lot. I remember the level of his play last year. This year he is playing much better. He started adding heads up, added reg wars, raised his technical level both here and there. It is clear that everything went well for him at 100k NL, but I still think he showed very decent result. And he'll be also at the top by technical level of play. By the way, you said about the top winners of all time on GG, and Smart Hand also does not take into account some part of the hands. There were games on 100k NL with straddle and wrist straddle when the blinds were 16 and 32,000. So essentially it was a game of 300k NL and the players had a million each at the table. Smart Hand doesn't have these hands, but he won a lot there too. So he is by an even greater margin the top player according to the statistics. Those games you are talking about were crazy games where the hobby player was constantly putting straddles and rest straddles. It was Leon Cukernik. Well, yes, most likely, and there, not only he put straddles there, in principle all the other players put straddles. The blinds were 1k, 2k, then the next 4, 8, 16, 32,000. In fact, everyone played push-fold pre-flop there. 10 BB effective stacks. Yeah, it was such a fun game. Well, in my opinion, there are two people who won the most in this session, along with Victor. What can you add to this? About Avr0ra, except for the cliche that he's just a lucky guy for whom everything works out, technically he got better, I agree with you. Still, in my opinion, he does not reach the top 10. Yeah, there are a lot of similar players. He's about the same as Alex Treff. He lacks creativity, he has a good strategy, he has his own cool tricks, but these tricks essentially always hit the same point. He knows one trick well, but still, the people who are in the top 10, they know many different tricks and they know how to do them in different ways accordingly. I would not put him in the top 10 in terms of his level of play, but he is close to this. And given the fact that although he does not always select the game, he still has a decent approach, and I did not see him tilting much. It's hard to tilt when you're winning. Therefore, in general, it will be interesting to look at his game and results when he stops having so much luck. Here it will be interesting how he will show himself and how he will show his character. He has now accumulated a reserve of experience. He has played quite a lot of hands over the past couple of years. He has a lot of confidence due to what he has won. With this baggage, he should very well get through the periods when things don't work out for him. And he can get through these periods well. As a rule, people who go through such periods technically become even stronger in the end, because they are motivated to work more. And in fact, he may still come out of these in the very top ranks. He rode the first part of his career on the wave of upswing, but then he can use this advantage in such a way that he will come out of this even better. He will enter the top 5 in terms of skill and will, let's say, beat all the reg wars in terms of skill. So far his overall win rate is generally quite good. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 4 to 5 BB per 100 hands. But he has not yet played 500,000 hands on high stakes, so it is too early to draw conclusions about what will happen. But we are waiting. At a minimum, he will not fall much below the top winners in the terms of blinds. It is unlikely that he will lose 200 stacks over the next 200,000 hands. Yes, it's unlikely. Yes, very unlikely. So, he will most likely remain among the top players for the next year. In principle, his result is good, and in general, I would like to say something bad, but it's difficult to find something. Therefore, I think he will be fine. He may not become the best player in the world, but he has a chance to become the richest online cash game player in the world. Well, we have Limitless in first place, and I would like to say a few words about how beautiful this coincidence is. Because now this story is a little worn out, but then, from the side of people who watched the heads up between Stefan and Limitless, then it seemed that the title of the best player in the world was being played out, and there seemed to be no hope for a draw, and it seemed that someone either will win a lot and someone will lose a lot. Limitless lost a lot, and even mentally. I think it was a strong blow. And now to see this man as the best in the world based on the results of 2023 is very pleasant, and this is a very, very beautiful poker story in my opinion. I'm really happy for Limitless. It's worth adding that he as a player of course was reborn after those events, because if we take the immediate period when the match ended, it was clear that his quality of play was in a noticeable decline. But if we take 2022 and the end of the 2023, you can see how he improves and he catches up with all the best. He became more creative in his plays, he became more confident, and now he feels where he needs to bluff, and there simply were fewer tilted plays from him. In general, he has the approach that he preached, and as far as I can judge, he has an approach to understand the logic of his opponent and to do what people do not expect. This is his vision of poker, and it seems to me that he began to improve in it, and he is now one of the best in this aspect too. I said that David Jones knows how to do some non-trivial things and that he can play some secondary lines very good, and Victor is not far behind in this sense, and he knows how to play some line, some line that no one has ever figured out or studied in Solver. He is good in situations where no one understands anything, but the one who has more talent and experience will understand them better, and it seems to me that in these situations he has a big advantage over the other players from high stakes. This style appeals to me because I myself developed in this style, and I'm trying to do something similar, with minor differences of course. Still, I think Victor relies more and learns from experience, while I work more with data and numbers and take my understanding from there. Personally, my learning during the game is lame. I need to replenish my knowledge. And he, as far as I can see, this was evident in their heads-up match versus Stefan. He catches and adapts very well, despite the fact that there was a loss in the match. It was clear that he was still trying to understand and adapt. I think this is one of his competitive advantages. Now, when psychology is not putting so much pressure on him, this is partly due to the fact that he got out of makeup and backing. As far as I know, he's still in backing. It seems to me that he began to feel better psychologically, and his game began to blossom. When a person plays a strategy that is not aesthetic, not memorized by combinations, it is very important how you feel. This directly affects how well you implement your ideas. I notice in myself that during my periods of psychological instability, I play much worse. Of course, it's possible that he started to get lucky lately, including it's still evident from the plays, from the hand, that the quality of the game is growing very quickly. In principle, as a result, his WWSF have grown and the red line and the win rates become better this year, almost 100,000 hands at 4 BB. Previously he had about 2 BB. It seems to me that this is a good consequence of the fact that he had changed as a player. Therefore, if I had to choose the player of the year, probably this year it would be Victor. I completely agree with you. I'm a big fan of Limitless. I can say that he suffered a lot after losing to Stefan. Victor, for me, he is something similar to Isildur. He is just such a gambler. He is not afraid to take risks and make aggressive assumptions. He will put a half of his bankroll on Khabib easily. And it's just to take all the money you have and to bet it on a match against Stefan. And as a result, he is into debt. Conventionally, when Igor took that famous interview with him when Limitless had just appeared, I remember Jacer, my partner at the time, he was amused by the fact that Victor spent the entire broadcast declaring that he was the best 2KNL player in the world. Jacer was angry. He said, "What the hell, he doesn't know how to play at all." Then, objectively, Victor probably himself understood that he was not the best player on 2KNL. There was someone, but it's not a fact that it was Victor. He probably could have somehow shown something in terms of gameplay, but in general it was a bold statement that he was the best player. It was very subjective. That's why I like people like that. He is a gambler in a good sense, or maybe in a bad sense. And after losing, his game worsened and he couldn't rehabilitate for a long time, about a year. He went down much lower in stakes. He even played 5KNL. I remember on GG he sat on 20 BB tables on which it is impossible to earn anything. But it's funny, he played a couple of thousand hands and lost probably 30 buy-ins on 5KNL. Everything turned out very badly for him. I even remember his session when he played on hard tilt. He had just started playing on WPN. I actually thought it was some kind of hobby player playing, because he was playing on tilt. I remember how he played 4-bet with ace-queen offsuit against me. It was cut off against button. I played all in, he called and left the table. I thought, well, probably this is a hobby player. And then they told me that Hunters is Viktor Malinovsky. I was like, oh, I see. This was the very peak of his psychological bottom. He clearly lost his form then. Can you imagine? He started playing 5KNL in 20 BB stacks. I looked and I felt sorry because Victor is a person who does not count rake. This activity is not for him. Not like Stefan, of course, but also he sat and played a table that mathematically does not beat. He simply lost money. Maybe he played for respect. It's like when you play heads up at 20KNL, you at least have a chance to win, but mathematically there was no chance there. He played against 5 short stacks, plus there was also a hobby player at the table. It was simply mathematically impossible to make money there. It's fun when you lose, when they beat you in skill, but when the game can't be beaten mathematically, it's like a casino, it's like slots. The poker room is beating you, it turns out. No matter how you play, the best player in the world, True Teller, at his peak of his 20 BB game, he would lose on this table, because there is simply no win rate there. I am very glad that Victor dealt with this. It seems to me that Victor went through all this, got into shape again, and now, this year, he played very well. I was actively following, I tried to play myself, and I can say that Victor played well in both the games with EEE and the games with Colorful, and he won most of the money from this same Colorful. He played value correctly, made provocative block bets, they worked great. He played well against hobby players, made spot bluffs where necessary. Not everything worked, but this year Victor found his game and the result was logical. Unfortunately, it seems to me that this year is not so good for him in net profit because I followed Triton and he played all the Tritons everywhere and never got into ITM. He spent a lot of money on buy-ins, so in pure money I don't know how he performed offline in Macau. I hope it's good. He lives there, we just met there. I was living in Macau and he just arrived. You could say that we swapped places. I think he performed well there. He is definitely one of the strongest players there. Him and Bjorn Lee. And I'm glad that our top one in terms of net profit in 2023 is Viktor Malinovsky. I was just sitting there trying to imagine what it would be like to be in his shoes, in the sense that, like you said, how much self-confidence he had in the 20s, and then to get hit like that, it is so painful and it destroys your picture of reality so much. He could not recover from this blow for a year. 2 years passed and only now he was able to get through it. You have to put a lot of effort into working on yourself to overcome something like this. And in fact, it turns out that he had to learn a certain lesson, and only after going through a such lesson could he return to the same game again and rise to the top again. It would be cool to make top 5 in terms of skill with you. Let's choose 5 players by the level of play and we will compare both of our lists. Do you understand what I want? Here's our top 5s in terms of skill. I think you won't be happy with Barak. We have matches, a Muniz match, a Davy match, a Linus match, and you still chose Linus. You said that he is no longer in the top. I told you he's not in the top 4. Alright, he's in the top 5. The gradation is strict. I was just thinking about the 5th nickname, who to include. Roughly speaking, the first 3 immediately came to mind. Why do you like Matt Marinelli so much? His game is very creative, but he has very strong EV losses, doesn't he? Well, look, he has a very exploitative game and a very creative game. That is, I really felt how, let's say, he plays, not that confidently, but how much courage he has in his lines. What I said about Daniil, for example, that he has the same thing, but Matt makes full use of it. He creates lines that are never played in a solver, but they work so well in practice that it really inspires respect. I believe you. I respect him very much as a player, but I wouldn't risk taking him into my top 5. But, well, okay. His game is not GTO oriented. You see, he didn't really play with anyone. His game works on weaker lineups. It's not a fact that it will work in the strongest ones. Well, listen, he plays Rec Wars too. Well, who did he play with? He played Reg Wars with me and Enlight, and this is still not super tough opposition. I understand, but it will be interesting to see. I did not evaluate here based on the results, but purely on the lines and ideas. We played quite a lot together, me, Avr0ra, Mikbil, Muniz, Enlight. Muniz and Avr0ra won the most, but the opposition was weaker. It's not the same to play Linus, Davy, Gale, as they play at 20k NL. It's still much weaker. Of course, I agree. But there is probably also a point in how we need to approach the assessment of technical skills, because one side is where you evaluate diversity, creativity, courage, some irregular situations. Secondly, these are some standard situations, because standard situations also need to be played well. For example, there are reliable solid players. Munez is a reliable player, he wins simply due to tactics. Take Munez's database without heads up and try to find a bad hand, objectively bad. And I think that in Munez's base, you won't find a hand that would be objectively played poorly. You won't find any. Take any other player, you will find such hands. I mean, he has bad hands against hobby players, but still, these will be hands where you will find some kind of exploit. Of course, you can get to the bottom of everyone, but these won't be huge objective mistakes. You can always discuss. Yes, this can be a mistake, but it won't be a definite mistake, especially in reg wars. You simply won't see bad hands. I would describe his technical part as he plays standard situations well, but not some narrow lines. He doesn't take risks often enough, doesn't create situations where he has a poor feel for the game, doesn't create situations where he has poor direction. He has a great fundamental base of standard situation that he plays better than other players, but he doesn't often create lines that are played rarely. For some other players it happens a little more often, for some less. He tries not to enter this territory, and for example, Stefan's scene is that he constantly creates some unusual lines. Yeah, he comes up with bullshit himself and gets confused in it. Yeah, he creates all sorts of muddy lines. In some of them he makes a win rate, in some of them he loses it. Look, what you are doing is the who score concept, equity and re-equity of the game. You create those lines where you feel confident, where you understand the ranges, where you lead ranges. And at the same time, when your opponent creates non-standard lines for you, you must react somehow. And Munez, as you say, does not create these lines himself. He creates those in which he is confident. But at the same time, when he is put in a difficult situation, he understands more or less well. He doesn't play bad hands. Stefan creates these lines in which no one understands what is happening. Not even Stefan himself, nobody understands. And Munez will understand it better than Stefan, who created it. On average, it seems to me, at least now. Now, what are you talking about? Marinelli creates these lines, okay, he does it, but standard situations, he plays worse than Stefan too. Imagine that he plays one-on-one against Stefan. He will somehow play these situations wrong. And here is Munez. He has a very strong reactive game, like in boxing. He's a, let's say, counter-puncher. Let's say you will offer him situations, and he will come out of the situations very well. He won't do bullshit. He won't give away too much. He will build his range correctly. He will sort this out somehow. You won't catch him on this line. He himself will not attack so aggressively, but he doesn't need it. You're not afraid of a person who knows a million different moves, half of which are bad. You're afraid of someone who knows his moves well. He plays his working tricks, and when he encounters non-standard things himself, his reaction is very good. He has a good reactive game and an awesome active game. In fact, his active game is just awesome. It's just not diverse, but it's beautifully polished. Therefore, I think that it will be not correct to compare. It is not entirely correct to compare, because the game is not diverse. EV is important here. Let's put Munez, Marinelli and someone else like Tex here at the same table. I thought about leaving Kevin in the top. I was choosing between Kevin and Barak, and I still chose Barak, solely because it seems to me that Kevin played very little this year. Last year I would definitely have to put Kevin in the top, but it was in 2023. At the end of the year, Kevin was completely fed up with poker and didn't really play. He partied a lot, judging by his Instagram. He's at the bar every evening. I think he's given up on poker a little. He can get in shape, but I chose Barak, just because of the amount of work that goes into it. Barak sits in the lobby, Barak trains, Barak plays heads up. Barak plays very similar to Munez. Barak is similar to Munez, but technically weaker. I am often asked on streams whose database is best to study. I say study Barak, he has a game without bullshit, let's put it this way. Yes, this is exactly a stable game in which the basic spots are played well and some unusual spots are cut off a little. They are skipped. Barak will probably react worse than Munez. I respect him precisely because when I analyzed his database, I did not find strong EV losses there. They are not there, and this is a very big indicator. You take other top players with whom he plays. Let's say he plays with Dude 1, and you will find EV losses. Even if we consider the same and light, even though he will not agree with this, but I remember a session where he played against the Chas, who is supposed to be Ben Affleck. And Light was upset then. It was clear that he had played this session poorly. At least I see where Enlight is wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm looking at it from my side. All our ratings are subjective. We evaluate based on our experience, and it seems to me that Barak has fewer hands that I don't like than Enlight, for example. And Enlight is a very strong player in my opinion, very strong, but his bad results are not only bad luck after all. He chooses games poorly and sometimes plays without selection. It's a bad approach, yes. Still, a player's career is not only about the technical level, but also about the approach. Again, I really don't like the approach when Enlight plays with many opponents at the same time. Barak, Munez, Make Boyfriend, they don't have this, but Enlight has it. And it seems to me that it doesn't lead to success. Also, Barak, maybe you don't like him, but look, it happened recently. Gia is a player who lost a lot of money to Barak, and who moreover plays worse against Barak than against the other players, because he always plays against him on tilt. Gia suggests, let's open more tables, and what Barak does, he closes tables with other hobby players, focusing on playing with Gia. Right in front of me, Barak left the table with a hobby player on 10k NL. He has a very professional approach. This is called professionalism. You're not trying to chase two birds with one stone. He just doesn't have it. He thinks like this. I ran after this target and let go the second one. And this is very smart. And Enlight and Stefan, they both have it. They will never leave the table. To kick Stefan off the table, the lobby must restart. This is like the only chance. It also has a lot to do with confidence and some laziness, being too involved in the game, when you are so immersed in the game that you forget to close the table and don't even think about it. But yes, of course, I agree. If this is so, that's okay, but I think it's partly greed and ego. Maybe, but I think all factors are in mix. Probably all together. I also agree, most likely in terms of earnings per hour, this turns out to be more negative than positive. And I also wanted to comment on the moment. You said that you see many players having problems with... No, let me correct myself. I'll say right away. I see the lines from my point of view, otherwise Enlight will start to text me a personal message right now. Let's say, according to the solver, this is not an EV loss, but from my experience I consider this to be EV loss. Ratings are subjective things. From my position, I see that this spot is bad for a hero call, or this spot for bluff is good. And if Enlight, let's say, checks behind, I see this as EV loss, let's say, in my personal opinion. I got it, yeah. The very fact that players make such moves means that they are trying to outplay their opponent. It means that they are trying to make some kind of, let's say, extreme exploit, radical exploit, one might say. Agree. And most likely, if they have such EV losses, then somewhere they have EV wins of the same size. I absolutely agree. The only question is, what happens more often? It seems to me that you are trying to sit on two chairs simultaneously. You are trying to objectively make a rating, but you still won't be able to do it. It is impossible to compile such a rating objectively. Therefore, I consciously ignored this and made it purely subjective. In my opinion, this is purely subjective rating. I won't argue with you. Objectively, tax here will probably be higher than Barak, but I think you get the point. I made a subjective rating. Yes, but in any case, a subjective rating, it still has to start from something. We take exactly BB per 100 hands, which a person will show, and all other things being equal. Equal lineups and so on and so on. And if we look at it this way, then it seems to me that we still need to take into account what approach the player uses in his strategy. There are more players who risk, let's say, they make extreme radical exploits, and accordingly they have more variance. But if they fall into the flow and logic, then their win rate will be much higher. Of course. And if they are a little confused about what's going on, their win rate will be lower. What happens with Stefan? And in this sense, it seems to me that Barak and Munoz do not often risk making some kind of radical exploits. Jason Gale doesn't really like it either, but he does it a little more often. But Davey, Marinelli, Taxia, they just like to press the gas pedal all the way. You are talking about exploits from the point of view of the gas pedal, but there is also an overfold exploit. Yes, of course, too. About the gas pedal, I mean a radical exploit. Overfold can also be radical. There is a spot where you need to call 40 to 60% of the range, and you call only 5% of the range. This is like super radical. Yes, I wanted to say that too. You can fold the third nut, for example. Muniz has a lot of such exploits. Yes, he understands well where he can fold, where he can call. He probably understands this better than others. This is exactly the player from whom you can't squeeze an extra penny, and Barak too. It's not easy to win a big pot against Barak if it's not a cooler. I played with him a lot. It's about the same with Davey and Tex here. I've already told this story. Let's say it's usually more convenient for me to play with people who make expensive bluff catches too often. For example, Barak, he doesn't make expensive bluff catches against me. It seems like a small thing, but it already means that I have to somehow strain myself, come up with some bluffs behind the ranges, wider than necessary. Let's say this puts me in an uncomfortable position. When a person overfolds against me, in order to correctly find a solution, I need to spend a lot more resources. It turns out that this player is more difficult for me. By the way, it's the other way around for me. All the players are different. Yes, it's the other way around for me. It's difficult for me to play against an opponent who don't give an extra penny of fold equity, like Cindy and others. It's unpleasant for me to play against them, because the whole game is turned into simply collecting combinations. I put together a combination, value bet, and with a bluff you sit and think, well, okay, I bluffed the best bluff, but with an average bluff I just give up. It is clear that you are not just playing check down to the river with a bluff. You will place a bet somewhere, but the beauty of the game is a little lost when you realize that your bluff will not receive any reward in the end. It's a subjective thing. I don't agree. From my position, I can say, for example, you play with some person who overcalls, and you need to distribute your hands along the lines in such a way that he does not understand that you are not bluffing much. You need to distribute them across the lines in such a way that when you have 10% bluff in this situation, and the other 90% is value, but your opponent should not see check back with a give up. You don't have to show that you checked back with king high, which is mandatory bluff. When you give up, you shouldn't give him a single showdown where your opponent will see that you didn't bluff. You show him the showdown so he can think, okay, he gave up because he didn't have the right card. This is also art, in fact. As a person who played in Reg Wars for some time with the same Linus and Stefan, I can say that this is also not an easy task. We played a lot on stars. In such games the head works really well. Your main adjustment is that you play your value range correctly, and you want your opponents to keep calling. There are also such things that you only bluff 10% and value bet 90%, but in these 10% there are bluffs that visually look like out of range bluffs. You can come up with some metagame tricks that your opponent will never be able to check. There is beauty in this too. There is an exploit in this too. This is the beauty of the game, so it seems to me that you just enjoy it less. Yes, of course, I like to create some kind of line that no one has ever played. Put some strange hand in there. In general, do something that is not shown in a solver, something you won't see in a solver. I mean, people already know how to copy a solver in everything. Like, with this hand we bluff, with this hand we check, here we will bet so many percent, and when you try to take a person beyond the usual, you try to force him to reason and think in other categories, a beautiful game begins. That's how I see it. I agree. For me, it is the art of poker. I can say that even from the point of view of Stefan's opponent, it's very interesting to play with him, to solve the riddles that he sets for you. He poses a riddle to you, 3 times 10% of the pot, and you need to decide how to play correctly and what to raise. Let's determine the player of the year. Yes, player of the year, as I said, in my opinion, it's Victor. I would also designate breakthrough of the year. In fact, the discovery of the year, let's say, in those who showed themselves for the first time this year, and here of course I would highlight Daniel, who broke into high stakes. And the second person is Matt Marinelli, who just broke into the expensive game and showed himself worthy. So much so that I even include him in a top list. I think these two players have become significant for me this year. I completely agree with you. I also give the player of the year to Limitless. The comeback was amazing, top 1 in terms of pure profit. In my opinion, Victor fully deserved it. He played a lot, tried hard, played offline, played the Triton event. I think Victor fully deserved the title player of the year. I also wanted to give the breakthrough of the year to Daniel, among the newcomers who are worth mentioning. Matt Marinelli still played actively before this, but I guess I agree. I really liked the interview with him on Mechanics of Poker, it's just great. And I'll probably also note Peter Knop. He comes to mind. He's not exactly a beginner, although he had bad luck at the high stakes. He lost some, but he still has an excellent result at 5k and 10k. Peter Knop is also a student of Barak, most likely. Yes, he's at their school. I would mention Peter Knop as one of the potential future high stakes breakers. I think he was winning at 5 and 10k back in 2022. So, not really. There is also an Estonian player, a friend of Markus Ladiv, Preet Parmasto. He can still be noted. He doesn't play technically very well yet, but he's also not afraid. He plays aggressively, he shoots high stakes, he's also a fresh face. By the way, you can also mention Tobias Dude, although he also performed well in 2022. Dude played poker when I started, so he's definitely not a beginner. Alright, it would be incorrect. Dude 1 had a cool graph on stars. I remember he lost a lot on 5k and 10k, and then for a very long time he tried to win back at 2k. It was a long story. Sounds like the story about the start of my career at 5 and 10k NL. It wasn't smooth either. I remember you played with Munoz. We discussed this session. He's my partner. Then we actively analyzed hands, and I remember you played open 4-bet. I remember that you had ace-jack suited. Button raised you played the 3-bet from the SB, Munoz open 4-bet from BB, and you called the open 4-bet. I played 5-bet. Maybe. I remember there was an open 4-bet spot with you and Sergey. Maybe we are talking about different things. I remember that you had AJ and you paid the stack on an ace-high board. No, I think I played a bet all-in. There was a 200 BB stack. Yeah. I remember there was something tough with AJ. I remember you lost, you had AJ and something tough happened. Then Munoz and I discussed. He had probably ace-king. Yeah, you seem to have such a hand. From a solver's point of view, it may not be terrible, but the point is that you played against Munoz. His ranges are more accurate, you can get killed. It was a long time ago, 2 years ago, if not 3. Yeah, it was 2020, COVID. I tried to play Reg Wars and catch the wave. We then lived in Costa Rica as a big gang. Everyone was on the rise in terms of game results. And accordingly, I started trying all the expensive games. Oh, I remember Poker Kluka was in a lineup too. Yeah, Kluka, Steph was there too, yeah. And I didn't do very well then. But now, after 3 years, your ego has already shrunk and in general, you have become more reasonable. Do you think at the moment you were playing on WPN without Rake, in the lineup Kluka, Munoz and you, who was the favorite? How do you think? Well, it's hard to say with win rate distribution. If you take 3 max, I think I was a slight underdog. I don't know how it was expressed in VB per 100 hands, but if we consider exactly this 3 max, then I could probably lose within 1 to 1.5 BB, simply due to the fact that I did not have enough experience. So technically, interestingly, in 2020 I technically considered myself in the top 5 in the world in principle. So maybe you was. Yeah, technically, the things that I understood and studied, how to play and what people were doing, not a lot of people were doing it back then. Now, I don't even consider myself in the top 10. Maybe if we join some kind of pool, we will be somewhere in the same pool in the top 20 or 30. Then, of course, I felt much more comfortable in terms of technical advantage, but due to the fact that I had no experience in expensive games and I had a limited bankroll, etc., the quality of my game was very different from what I could show. Accordingly, then I think that many moments did not allow me to express myself. Alright, let's analyze this hand. 183 BB effective stack, Steph raises, you play 3-bet 11 BB, Munoz open 4-bet, you 5-bet with AK, Munoz call, click 5-bet you played, right? Yes, it was a small 5-bet sizing, less than 2x. I was thinking that at this stage it would be better to play all in, but I decided not to do so. By going all in, it's like I'm cutting off the opportunity to play post-flop and get some extra money post-flop. Let's say at that time I was very confident in myself and therefore decided to leave more choice to myself rather than play all-in right away, believing that probably I can gain an advantage post-flop. You, as a technically savvy player, I have a question right away. Click 5-bet is placed. As far as I understand, in the polar range, in the regular 4-bet range, the regular 4-bet range is still more polar than the open 4-bet range. The open 4-bet range is just the very top, and the regular 4-bet range is more polarized. There is no middle part. Do we really need to use click 5-bet here? Yes, I understand that you are talking about what part of the range it makes sense to create pressure on, and what hands we then put pressure on if we play click 4-bet. This is a poker base. Here the open 4-bet range is strictly linear, only the top 4%. That is a strictly linear range. I think we have no fold equity here. Look, I think that for such a 5-bet you should give up with hands like in GTO. where there will be a fold around 20%, and it will be a fold of some hands like ace-4 suited of some kind, ace-queen offsuited. If it goes there, I got some hands like king J suited, something like that, at the very bottom. In short, I didn't expect to knock out any pair of tens here. Absolutely, but the problem is that it seems as if we, from the point of view of game logic, it is not clear what we are trying to achieve. We knock out a little dominance and we do not get folds. Look, it was a good moment. I remember Sulsky talked about it a long time ago, although maybe you don't respect him as a theorist. I used to have a lot of respect for him. Previously, yes. An interesting point about which group of hands is punished by a white call 4-bet. There was an interesting simulation there. For example, button played 4-bet, where button's 4-bet was as usual, and BB called wide range super wide, and button's 4-bet range is locked, and BB calls any. And what actually happens with button's EV? It's interesting that from a very wide call from BB, wider than in GTO, AK lost its EV, but EV of pocket aces increased greatly, but AK's EV fell. And this is in simulation where we are in position with AK, but here we are out of position, and it seems to me that it's simply theoretically wrong. This is a theoretically unjustified sizing, or am I wrong? I think so. If we think within the framework of a solver, this is not a justified sizing, because in a solver the post-flop game is already equal, and you won't be able to exploit anything there, and so on. In this sense, the solver always has the desire to reduce the SPR without position. Here we need to either reduce the linear range or, on the contrary, not accelerate it. Here we are more likely to play all-in or call, roughly speaking. Yes, if we think that we cannot extract additional EV anywhere post-flop, but if we begin to assume that for some unknown reason we can make additional EV post-flop, then it is beneficial for us to leave a larger number of lines possible on post-flop. It is beneficial for us to leave a bigger SPR, and therefore, in this sense, it seems to me, in my practice, I have now switched to 3-bet with a small sizing. Although they are not confirmed by the solver at all, but I have 9 blinds without a position. Just because I want to test this theory. I want just play and see what happens. Your skill cap is higher. I talked about this a long time ago when there was a period when Stefan was actively playing with 3-bet of 13BB. And I, as a person who has been playing with Stefan for 8 years now, I can say that it was easier to play with him then. In general, you just threw away all the time and sometimes played all in. This was the easiest moment. That is, when Stefan 3-bet with small sizes, it is much harder to deal with. You need to call wide, you can't 4-bet, he doesn't fold anything to 4-bet. All the time some kind of showdown happens post-flop, it's difficult to play. And in the past you just played all in against his 14BB, and it was a blast. Yeah. This is precisely a consequence of the fact that we find ourselves less often post-flop. SPR is lower, and in machine solutions this is an important factor. When you have 0.1% increased equity realization, it gives you an advantage. And when people figure it out and play among themselves, then the spread of win rate is much greater. The cost of minimal human errors is many times higher. Even a small mistake is many times higher than the cost of these implementation factors. Yeah, it's so-called exploitability. Well, listen, then with the same logic it's more logical to just play a call against an open 4-bet more often. But you still went into more aggressive line, well, okay. At that time, as far as I remember, I had the idea that 5-bet looked scary in general, and if you continue to play all in there, then it would be generally look scary, because people don't like to play that way. Actually, I played bet all in following this logic. I remember we discussed in detail with Flopzilla how to act here. We finally came to the conclusion that I don't remember what we came to. I honestly don't remember what we came to. And here is the most interesting point. Firstly, is it worth calling with pocket queens on a turn? And the second point is, how many hands like ace-king and backdoors will remain after the flop? Because it is not so difficult to play a strategy here as the aggressor. And for the defender, the only question will be how many bluffs will be collected on these pocket aces and pocket kings, which will be here, because in theory both aces and kings can quite easily play 200 BB without losing EV. Well, yes, the key combination is pocket queens in this hand. I think Munoz could fold 2 queens on a turn, so it's a reasonable bluff. Well, yeah, then it would be a cool bluff. The problem is that the first problem in that spot, BB cutoff, is still BB-SB cutoff. There is open 4-bet. Well, there's also pocket 10s, an important combination, but it seems to me that Munoz may never have pocket 10s here. Well, it seems to me that solver does not always 4-bets with pocket 10s. Yes, in very low frequency of pocket 10s, even pocket jacks in a partial weight. There will be probably some kind of ace-10 suited more often than pocket 10s. Well, the way Munoz plays, you blocked ace-10 suited, although you could have been ahead against them. And what other combinations are there? King-queen suited? Well, yes, the key combination is pocket queens. If pocket queens is always folded, then all in is good, but let's say the queen without a clubs card, will Munoz throw it away? But if someone here throws out queens without clubs, then it will be Munoz. Well, I think that on your side, it's better for you to do this without an ace of clubs, in order to have good chances against floats, where ace-queen suited and ace-10 suited can play aggressively. You'll still be a little ahead sometimes. Well, yes, probably if I had, for example, ace and king of inappropriate suits. Ace and king of hearts generally ideal to leave floats with ace-queen suited. Yeah. But I think even if there is an ace of clubs, in general, the main fold range of the BB on the turn is ace-king, rare floats, king-queen, ace-10, which turned out to be not with full frequency here. Would you 5-bet pre-flop and call? The question is non-obvious. Yes, it's non-obvious, because I bet 44 to 45 BB, probably not. I probably would have folded here anyway. I would believe that Munoz does not play all-in with ace-king in this situation, at least in 2020. With 200 BB, almost no one played all-in with ace-king offsuited. Interesting. The all-in range, yes, would look narrow, a little pocket aces, a lot of pocket kings, and ace-king suited. Against such a range, it seems there is no chance of playing all-in there. Somehow I think so, but basically it's a cooler. I remember Munoz thought for a long time with AJ. I think it was a difficult decision with this combination. Well, as far as I remember, he didn't spend the entire time bank there, of course. He pressed the time bank for a few seconds and then still called. This hand is better than queens because of the extra outs against pocket kings. Aces are blocked. Instead of 12 value combinations, there are 9 left. This is tough, so he has a super hand here. And even with this hand he was very unsure, he didn't know what to do. Sort of, but this is, by the way, the biggest losing 5k hand I've ever had. But you won a 120k pot there. No, this is the biggest loss at 5k. 120 was naturally not at 5k. We played 150 to 300 with an ante. Tough, it's a big game. Are you not afraid that there may be dishonesty in applications and you will encounter fraud? No, there is a very narrow player pool and everyone there gives their real name when you log in, so I think it's impossible. So they are about the same people as on GG. No, there is a pool of American offliners, Asian offliners, some people who are not particularly visible online. In short, the scammers are just like that. Well, yes, but again, the person who invited me told me about each nickname, who they are, what's their real name, and this one plays so much offline, he lives there. Roughly speaking, all the people are from offline, and they are known in the local offline. So there were also Asian hobby players. Asian hobby players, as I understand it, are also famous in their circles. There is no reason to worry too much. It's cool, I wish you success, tear them all up. I hope. I took a break before the new year. It still affected that the expensive game was very nerve-wracking, because even the pot that I showed, where I won 220k, when I bet the value bet, there was such adrenaline, because the value bet there is not the nuts. I might end up weaker, easily. There were quite a lot of such hands there. Money was pressing you. Yes, of course, the money was pressing. Even though my share of myself was not very large, but just an anti-game of 150 to 300. This is in fact 80k NL. And as a person who has not yet played too much at 10k NL, going into such a game right away, and all these unknown opponents, I did not have the opportunity to sort them out in advance. There were a lot of uncomfortable moments, so I took a break to recover, but I'll be back soon. We'll keep an eye. We'll leave a link to Bootie's Telegram. Bootie started his own Telegram. We will keep an eye on you, and we hope that the time to leave will be delayed for now. Yeah, time to leave is postponed. We're looking forward to streams in the new year. Thank you all for watching. I hope someone listened to the end of the podcast. It will be the longest in our history. Bye everyone.